Hey there, sleuths. Welcome to the Detective's Den, your one-stop spot for unpacking mysteries, cracking cases, and diving deep into the unknown. I'm your name, and I'll be your guide on this investigative journey. Globe showing Europe, Africa. Now tell me, from which corner of the globe are you tuning in today? Drop your location in the comments below. Let's see just how far our detective network reaches. Chapter 1, An Invitation to Thornwood. Hercule Poirot sat in his snug drawing room at King's Cross, the late afternoon sun slanting through the lace curtains and illuminating his perfectly polished shoes. He was enjoying a cup of Darjeeling tea, accompanied by a modest plate of madeleines, when a courier arrived, bearing an envelope of heavy ivory stationery sealed with deep crimson wax. Poirot's precise fingers broke the seal, and he scrutinized the elegant script. Monsieur Hercule Poirot. The Carlton Hotel, London. Dear Monsieur Poirot. It would be my pleasure to welcome you and your esteemed companion, Captain Arthur Hastings, to Thornwood Manor for the forthcoming weekend. I harbor a small hope that your celebrated talents might lend some illumination to certain family concerns, purely private, of course. Your stay would begin on Friday evening and conclude on Monday morning, with all amenities provided. Yours most sincerely, Aurelia Thornwood. Poirot replaced his monocle, his neat moustaches bristling in contentment. A family concern, at Thornwood Manor, the prospect was irresistibly inviting. He rang for his valet, Eustache, and dictated a polite acceptance, adding a request for Hastings's attendance. 2 days later, Poirot and Hastings found themselves aboard the 11:15 a.m. express from Victoria Station, bound for Chichester. The train pulled gracefully out of the bustling terminus, and Poirot leaned back, surveying fellow passengers with a whimsical tilt of the head. Hastings, ever amiable, remarked on the pleasantness of the weather and the promise of a relaxing weekend. Poirot merely smiled enigmatically, his mind already afire with anticipation. As the train threaded through rolling Sussex countryside, fields of golden wheat and emerald pasture passed by in a comforting blur. Hastings leaned forward. I wonder what form this family concern will take, Poirot. Illness? A stolen heirloom? Or perhaps, his voice dropped conspiratorially, a murder. Poirot tapped his index finger against his perfect moustache. Mysteries often wear many masks, mon ami, he replied in soft, deliberate tones. But we shall see. For now, let us savor the scenery. The morning light lingered upon quaint villages, their red brick cottages scented faintly of lavender and fresh-baked bread. At last, they alighted at the small station nearest Thornwood Manor. A waiting carriage, polished to a high shine and drawn by 2 ebony-groomed horses, stood ready. The coachman tipped his hat in strict deference as Poirot and Hastings climbed into the rear seat. The drive to the manor took them along a winding lane bordered by ancient yew hedges. Occasionally, glimpses of a meandering stream or the distant spire of a parish church broke the verdant monotony. Thornwood Manor itself emerged from the trees like a stately phantom, red brick with tall mullioned windows, ivy clinging to its walls, and battlements framing an elegant silhouette against the pale blue sky. Lady Aurelia Thornwood greeted them at the grand oak front door. She was a lady of mature grace, her silver hair swept into a coiffure that nonetheless revealed a hint of undiminished vivacity in her dark eyes. Dressed in a simple but stylish grey gown edged with fine lace, she offered a warm, if somewhat reserved, smile. Welcome to Thornwood Manor, Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she said in a clear, clipped voice. I trust your journey was comfortable. Parfaitement, replied Poirot, bowing with a flourish that made his tailcoat swirl elegantly. Hastings followed suit with a genial nod. They were escorted into the great hall, whose high ceiling boasted heraldic shields and an impressive chandelier of iron and crystal. A butler in immaculate livery, Mr. Baldwin, Poirot noted, stood to one side, his expression inscrutable. The rich scent of eucalyptus greeted them from a silver urn, and the soft murmur of conversation drifted from the drawing room beyond. Lady Thornwood waved them inward. Please make yourselves at home in the drawing room, where tea is already laid out. Dinner will be served at 8 o'clock, after which I shall explain the nature of my request." The drawing room was warmed by a generous fire. Overstuffed chairs upholstered in burgundy velvet surrounded a low table bearing a porcelain tea service, petit fours, and a vase of freshly cut peonies. Poirot sank into the nearest chair, and Hastings took the one opposite, giving him a conspiratorial grin. "Capital surroundings," Hastings murmured. "Indeed," replied Poirot, cradling his teacup with the precision of a surgeon. "But the true measure of a place lies in the subtle interplay of its inhabitants." No sooner had he spoken than the remaining guests arrived by carriage or motorcar: Colonel Edgar Harcourt, a distinguished figure in field grey uniform; Dr. Walter Lancaster, a quietly spoken man with snow-white hair and gold-rimmed spectacles; Miss Florence Griffiths, the young governess whose prim black dress contrasted sharply with her rosy cheeks; and Edward Thornwood, the nephew, whose dark suit and brooding expression suggested preoccupation. Each guest offered a brief greeting, and Hastings introduced himself and Poirot in turn. Poirot observed their postures and expressions: Colonel Harcourt's chest thrust forward, a silent assertion of rank; Dr. Lancaster's cautious gaze; Miss Griffiths's demure courtesy; Edward's forced smile; and Mr. Baldwin's ever-present, watchful stillness. Tea commenced, with polite remarks about the weather, the blooming roses of the manor gardens, and recent improvements to the estate. Poirot listened, his little grey cells at work. A tray of petits fours was passed, and as Hastings selected a raspberry macaron, Poirot's gaze flicked to Colonel Harcourt's untouched biscuit. "Not in the mood for sweets, Colonel?" Poirot inquired in gentle French-accented English. "Not at the moment, I'm afraid," Harcourt replied, his voice steady. "I have matters to discuss with Lady Thornwood." Soon, the chimes of the grandfather clock announced 5:30. Lady Thornwood stood and extended her hands in invitation. "Shall we retire to the library for coffee and perhaps a small brandy before dinner? It is more intimate." The library door opened onto walls lined with leather-bound volumes. Plush armchairs were arranged around a mahogany table, upon which lay scattered newspapers and a single, heavy volume of Elizabethan poetry. A faint scent of pipe tobacco lingered in the air. Once settled, Lady Thornwood poured coffee for the company, then filled delicate glasses with amber brandy. She cleared her throat softly, and all eyes turned toward her. "My dear friends," she began, "I have invited you here because Thornwood Manor has sheltered a family secret, one whose roots reach back decades. I fear that the time has come for this secret to be unearthed, lest it cause more harm in the shadows. Monsieur Poirot, your reputation for uncovering truth in the subtlest of clues precedes you. Will you help me?" Poirot sipped his brandy, then set the glass down with measured calm. "Lady Thornwood, I am at your service. I shall do my utmost to illuminate any shadows that cloud this venerable estate." At this pronouncement, the company exchanged furtive glances. Hastings leaned in and whispered, "I quite like the sound of this, Poirot. A secret long buried, it sounds delightfully dramatic." Poirot chuckled softly. "Drama, mon cher Hastings, is but the uninformed mind's perception of reality. For the detective, every element is but a precise fragment of a greater truth yearning to be assembled." As the first stars appeared in the dusky sky outside the leaded windows, the guests chatted quietly among themselves. Outside, the ancient oaks of Thornwood's parkland cast skeletal shadows in the lamplight. The wind rustled the curtains, and somewhere deep in the manor, the grandfather clock began to toll. Poirot, still calmly seated, surveyed the assembled party. In this elegant room, every glance, every gesture, every unspoken hesitation was a thread. And he, Hercule Poirot, possessed the artful skill to weave those threads into a tapestry of revelation. Thus began the weekend at Thornwood Manor, an invitation that would quickly transform into a most intriguing puzzle for the little grey cells of the world's greatest detective. Chapter 2, A Shadow in the Library. The dawn broke soft and mist-laden across the grounds of Thornwood Manor, as though the very air sought to veil what the new day might bring. Inside the great house, the corridors lay hushed, the flicker of candle flames dancing upon polished wood paneling. It was a morning of deceptive calm, for within an hour, that tranquility would be shattered. Captain Hastings, retired to his guest room above the west wing, was stirring from a fitful sleep when a sudden, piercing scream rent the air. He sat bolt upright, heart pounding, and bolted out of bed. Across the landing, the door to Poirot's suite stood slightly ajar, and the detective himself emerged, brushing his evening coat aside with practiced composure despite the urgency in his keen, dark eyes. "Mon ami," Poirot said, voice low but insistent, "we must investigate. There is a cry of distress." He retrieved his pince-nez spectacles from the nightstand and affixed them with precision. Together they hurried downstairs, following the echo of hurried footsteps and the distant clatter of fallen objects. Along the corridor, servants in night attire emerged, blinking at the sudden commotion. The housemaid, Mary, trembled as she passed, clutching a candle-lit sconce. "Miss Rowan," she whispered, voice shaking. It came from the library." Poirot nodded curtly. "Lead us, please." The group swept into the library, a vast chamber of dark oaks and leather-bound tomes. The morning light filtered through tall mullioned windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the stillness. But it could not dispel the gloom that had fallen upon the scene. There, sprawled upon the Persian carpet before the grand mahogany desk, lay Penelope Rowan, Lady Thornwood's beloved niece. Her fair hair fanned around her like a halo, though now stained with crimson. One delicate hand was pressed to her chest, the other splayed across the floor, as though she had collapsed with finality. A half-full glass of red wine lay overturned at her side, its contents pooled upon the carpet. Poirot knelt beside her with swift calm, gently lifting her wrist to test for a pulse. Mary and Hastings watched in anxious silence. Poirot's brow furrowed imperceptibly, but his movements remained smooth, measured. "She still breathes, but she is unconscious," he observed. "Fetch hot water, and ensure the physician is summoned at once." Mary scampered away, candle in trembling hand. Hastings crouched on the opposite side, reaching for Penelope's wrist to feel for a pulse. The clock upon the mantelpiece ticked steadily, its sound unnaturally loud in the heavy air. Moments later, Dr. Walter Lancaster arrived, his white coat rustling as he bent over Penelope with professional concern. "Her breathing is shallow," he announced, kneeling. "Move her gently, I must examine her." Together, Poirot and Dr. Lancaster eased Penelope onto a low divan. The doctor's experienced fingers probed her neck and checked her pupils. Hastings held a folded handkerchief to the wound above her temple, where a thin trickle of blood had seeped from a small laceration. "Is she gravely injured?" Hastings asked, voice hushed. Dr. Lancaster rose, wiping his hands on a cloth. "She has sustained a mild concussion and a superficial head wound. She is fortunate to live. But I must observe her for shock. Please, place her on a proper couch in my consulting room. I will attend to her there." Poirot stood, smoothing his crisp cravat. He surveyed the library with a practiced eye, the heavy oaken desk, its drawers slightly ajar, the ornate clock, its glass face unmarred, a solitary glove, white, embroidered with lavender sprigs, lying beneath a low shelf, and, fanned across the hearth, several charred fragments of paper. "Take note of each element, mon ami," Poirot instructed Hastings. "Every object whispers a fragment of the truth." As Penelope was carried out, Poirot moved deliberately through the room, his gloved fingertips brushing over the edge of the desk. He paused at the shattered teacup perched upon the desk's surface, porcelain splinters scattered like fragile petals. The cup's handle lay on the floor a few inches away, as though it had been struck forcefully. The deep red stain beneath it, he observed, might be either wine or something far more sinister. Poirot crouched to examine a single footprint pressed faintly into the thick carpet, a gentleman's shoe, size perhaps 9, with a distinctive horseshoe-shaped sole. He tapped the carpet gently with a finger. "This aged fabric retains impressions remarkably well," he murmured. He then turned his attention to the charcoal-stained hearth. Among the ashes, he located the remains of several tiny scraps, papers half consumed by flame. One fragment bore the printed heading of a local newspaper, and letters hinting at a name, Inisha row. Poirot held the scrap to the light, as though the shadows themselves might whisper further secrets. Hastings approached, bearing a second candle. "Poirot," he said softly, "there is something odd over here." He pointed to the latch of the window, firmly closed, with a thin smear of dust disturbed near its edge, as if someone had recently applied pressure to the frame. Poirot examined the window latch, then turned to the pane itself. The glass was intact, there were no cracks to suggest forceful entry. Outside, he could make out only the grey outline of a manicured lawn and the surrounding yew hedges. The window remained shut from within, he observed. The assailant used the door. He traced the pathway of the door's inset panels with a critical gaze. Yet, who approached by door in the midst of night and struck with such violence? The force needed to stun a healthy young woman would have been considerable. Hastings crouched beside Poirot, following his line of sight to a faint smudge upon the desk, perhaps a fingerprint disturbed by an oily thumb. "Should I fetch Lady Thornwood?" he asked. "Later," Poirot replied. "First, I must note every detail." He removed a slender pencil and a small notebook from his breast pocket and made careful sketches: the footprint, the fireplace scraps, the broken teacup, and the white glove beneath the bookcase. Each drawing was annotated with a few precise words. Once satisfied, Poirot rose and sampled a drop of the crimson spillage with the tip of a gloved finger. He sniffed it thoughtfully. Wine, mon ami, though perhaps not the wine intended. Notice the absence of a decanter on the serving trolley. Where, then, was this beverage poured? Hastings scoured the room and discovered, near the door, the silver tray ordinarily reserved for morning beverages. It was empty. "Gone," he reported. "No tray, no pot, no sugar bowl, nothing." Poirot's eyes brightened. Exactly. Whoever prepared this diversion sought to distract attention. But one never leaves the essential behind. If the tray was not required, the poison, or the coup de grace, lay elsewhere. Hastings frowned. Poison? You think Penelope might have been poisoned rather than struck? Perhaps, Poirot replied. An overdose of some fast-acting agent could induce fainting, followed by a blow to the head to make death appear accidental, or to ensure it. But the wound here is slight. I suspect the blow came after the poison took effect. Hastings swallowed. So we have attempted murder. It is too soon for certainty, Poirot cautioned. We have a victim in need of care, and an assailant at large. Let us summon Lady Thornwood and the household. Poirot opened the library door. In the cross hall beyond, he encountered Mr. Baldwin, the butler, standing at rigid attention. His face was as impassive as carved stone. "Mr. Baldwin," Poirot said, "inform Lady Thornwood that her niece has been attacked. Instruct every member of the household to remain in their quarters until further notice. No one must leave the premises." Baldwin inclined his head without a word and vanished. Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, Hastings. We must move swiftly, caring first for Miss Rowan, then questioning those who dwell here. Only by careful, step-by-step inquiry can we unravel the motive behind this act, and thus, perhaps, prevent another tragedy." As they left the library, the first faint echoes of approaching footsteps reached their ears. Beyond those doors, the elaborate tapestry of lives at Thornwood Manor awaited Poirot's unerring scrutiny, each thread vital, each secret potentially deadly. And within the silent halls, the unseen observer watched, poised between guilt and innocence, as the little grey cells closed in upon the truth. Chapter 3, Interviews and Intrigue. Late morning sunlight filtered through the oak-panelled walls of Thornwood Manor's drawing room, casting a lattice of light and shadow across the polished floorboards. The household had gathered at Poirot's request: Captain Hastings, Lady Thornwood, Colonel Edgar Harcourt, Dr. Walter Lancaster, Miss Florence Griffiths, Edward Thornwood and, discreetly stationed near the door, Mr. Baldwin, the butler. Each face bore some trace of anxiety, for Penelope Rowan remained under Dr. Lancaster's vigilant care, and the question of motive and culprit weighed heavily upon them all. Poirot stood before the marble fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, moustaches impeccably waxed. He addressed the company with calm authority. "Mesdames et messieurs, he began, "I thank you for your prompt attendance. It is regrettable that a crime has been attempted under this roof, but until we have completed our inquiries, none may leave the house. I shall require each of you to recount your activities late last night, around the hour of Miss Rowan's injury." He nodded to Colonel Harcourt first. The colonel, tall and broad-shouldered in his field grey uniform, stepped forward with cool composure. "I retired to bed shortly after 11, Monsieur Poirot," he said crisply. "I walked the corridors to see the night lighted for our guests, then returned to my room at the east wing. I heard no disturbance until Miss Rowan's scream." He paused. "I did venture outside earlier, upon hearing rustling by the rose garden. I thought it merely the wind." Poirot raised a slender finger. "Your boots, Colonel, may I?" The colonel extended one foot. Poirot stooped to examine the sole, noting a crescent-shaped tread pattern faintly spattered with dark earth. He raised an eyebrow. "You walked in soil resembling that of the library footprint." Harcourt hesitated, then nodded. "Indeed. I had paused by the window of the library, to admire the moonlight upon the volumes. I assure you, I touched no one." Next, Poirot turned to Dr. Walter Lancaster, whose snowy hair and kind eyes concealed a formidable intellect. The doctor advanced, removing his spectacles as though to polish them. "I confess, Monsieur Poirot, I visited Miss Rowan's room shortly before midnight. She confided a severe headache, and I administered a mild sedative. I then left her sleeping soundly." He replaced his spectacles. "Upon my return here, I found the library door ajar. I peered in, saw the chaos, and rushed to her aid." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his eyes gleamed. "Dr. Lancaster, the half-burned letters found in the hearth bore your handwriting, did they not?" The doctor paled. "That was an old correspondence from Miss Rowan, torn by the fire's heat. I had wished it destroyed entirely, as it concerned family matters she preferred remain private. I would never." "Of course," Poirot said softly. "Yet paper does not burn willingly until compelled." He made a note. Thereafter, Miss Florence Griffiths, slender in her prim attire, curtsied and stepped forward. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. "Miss Griffiths," Poirot said gently, "you were Miss Rowan's governess and confidante. Last night, did you observe anything unusual?" She swallowed. "Miss Rowan received an anonymous letter at tea, and she seemed disturbed. I urged her to show me, but she refused. Later, I found the letter torn in her wastepaper bin. I burnt what remained, fearing it might harm her. I then tidied her desk and retired early." "Your devotion is admirable," Poirot acknowledged. "Yet, Miss Griffiths, you hold a position of some vulnerability here. Could your affection have colored your judgment as to what might harm Miss Rowan?" Her pale cheeks flamed. "I meant only to protect her. She has no family but Lady Thornwood and me." Poirot inclined his head. He moved on to Edward Thornwood, nephew and principal heir to Lady Aurelia's estate. Edward, dark-haired and brooding, ran a hand through his hair before speaking. "Last night, I was in the billiard room practicing shots. Penelope owed me 10 guineas on a wager," he said, with a faint edge of bitterness. "But I heard nothing unusual until the scream. I did not visit her room." Poirot's gaze lingered on Edward's fingers, stained faintly with chalk dust. "Chalk dust may conceal many impulses," he observed. "And the engraving on the locket found in the rose garden, yea, it matches your initials." Edward's expression flickered with surprise. "I lost that locket years ago. I thought it at the bottom of the lake by the old boathouse." "A poignant loss," Poirot murmured. "Yet it surfaced here last night." Finally, Poirot regarded Mr. Baldwin, who had remained silent by the threshold. The butler stepped forward with quiet dignity. "Monsieur Poirot," he said in measured tones, "I served Miss Rowan tea at 4 and left the tray in her room. I heard nothing thereafter." He paused. "I only found the tray removed when preparing breakfast. It was most peculiar." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "The tray's absence suggests planning and premeditation." "Thank you, Monsieur Baldwin." He paced before the assembly, hands steepled. Each of you has given an account that seems, on its surface, credible. Yet, we know that appearances are not truth. Let us consider the timeline. Miss Rowan had headache, received letter, sent for sedative, and later, sometime between midnight and 1, she was struck unconscious in the library. He selected a chair and motioned for Hastings to join him. "Mon ami," he whispered, "what did you notice as I questioned them?" Hastings lowered his voice. Colonel Harcourt's boots matched the footprint, the doctor's sedative plausible but his fire suspicious, Miss Griffiths's devotion perhaps too zealous, Edward's locket convenient, and Baldwin's removal of the tea tray unexplained. "Precisely," Poirot said. He rose and addressed the room once more. "We must examine physical evidence. Will each of you submit to a brief inspection of your person and belongings?" Lady Thornwood, though distressed, nodded. One by one, Poirot and Hastings conducted a search. Harcourt's pockets yielded a handkerchief and a letter of commendation. Lancaster's coat bore scorch marks indicating proximity to flame. Griffiths's reticule contained no letter remnants. Edward produced the locket and a billiard cue chalk, and Baldwin's tray was discovered hidden in a cupboard, empty, but bearing a smear of red wine. Poirot held up his hand for silence. This smear, wine indeed. Yet earlier analysis of the carpet stain in the library showed presence of a foreign alkaloid. We must conclude that an attempt was made to incapacitate Miss Rowan chemically, then to render the blow as the cause of collapse. An audible murmur ran through the room. Dr. Lancaster's face tightened. He placed a hand to his pocket, but withdrew nothing. Colonel Harcourt's lips thinned, and Edward clenched his fist. Miss Griffiths's eyes filled with tears. Lady Thornwood gasped. Poirot continued, his tone firm yet measured. "Let us not leap to conclusions about guilt. We must first reconstruct who had opportunity, motive, and means. Opportunity, each household member had access to the library and Miss Rowan's room. Motive, financial, protective, or emotional bonds, to which we shall return. Means, knowledge of poison, strength to wield a blow, and the ability to manipulate evidence." Lady Thornwood approached, anxious. "Poirot, what shall we do next?" "Observe, dear lady," he replied. "We shall withdraw to the library after luncheon. There, I shall demonstrate how these threads intertwine." He turned to Hastings. "Prepare the ground, Hastings, by ensuring the library is inaccessible to all but invited participants." Hastings sealed the library doors, stationed 2 footmen at either side, and returned with a nod. An air of tense expectancy settled upon the assembled company. After lunch, Poirot announced, "We shall reconvene to consider the evidence further. Until then, rest and reflect." As the guests dispersed, some exchanging worried whispers, others sinking into chairs, Hastings leaned close to Poirot. "You truly think the poison and the blow were a single plan?" "Mais oui," Poirot replied, brushing an imaginary crumb from his lapel. "The brilliance of a plan lies in its simplicity. Yet a single flaw, a delay, a misplacement, a discarded glove, reveals the hand of the criminal. We have many such flaws to inspect. Now, Hastings, to luncheon. But keep your eyes open and your mind sharper still." Thus, with suspects dispersed to their quarters and Poirot's mind racing through each testimony, the air in Thornwood Manor hung heavy with suspicion. Beneath its genteel veneer, motives simmered like a pot left on slow heat. And Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells fully engaged, prepared for the next phase of his relentless inquiry. Chapter 4, The Clue of the Hidden Locket. Late that afternoon, after the hush of post-luncheon had settled upon Thornwood Manor, Hercule Poirot requested the company of Captain Hastings in the library. The room, now secured and sparsely lit by afternoon sunbeams, awaited their return. At Poirot's behest, Hastings had gathered the small tray upon which the late Miss Rowan's silver locket had been found, along with the single white glove and the charred paper fragments from the hearth. Hastings placed the objects on the low table before them. Poirot arranged them with exacting care. The glove lay to one side, the locket, open and revealing its twin portraits, occupied the center, and the fragments of paper were strewn neatly in a group. Poirot leaned close to the locket, his pince-nez perched at the tip of his nose. "Observe, Hastings," he said quietly, "the portrait of Penelope on the left, subtle brush strokes capture her gentle smile. Yet on the right, the likeness is of the same young lady, against a background of stormy skies. He paused, finger tracing the tempestuous painted clouds. A curious contrast, n'est-ce pas? Very, Hastings agreed. But what of the engraving? E.A. Those initials do not match Penelope's name. Indeed, they match neither Rowan nor Thornwood, Poirot murmured. Yet they correspond to one Elizabeth Anders, a governess once employed by Lady Thornwood's late husband, whose tenure ended under mysterious circumstances. He snapped his fingers softly. A connection, mon ami. Hastings frowned. You think Miss Rowan discovered something about Anders? Possibly, Poirot replied. But let us not leap ahead. First, the locket's very presence in the rose garden suggests more than accident. He turned his attention to the glove. White, silk, embroidered with lavender sprigs, an accessory of refinement. Yet only one such glove was found, and it lay beneath the bookcase. Poirot rose and moved to the hearth. There, in the ash-filled grate, he crouched to inspect the charred fragments. These scraps, he said, retrieving a larger piece, bear traces of copperplate script. I have already sent for a transcription by the housekeeper, but some letters remain discernible, dear friend, and must not let them know. Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder. A secret letter, burnt in haste. Someone wished to conceal correspondence between Miss Rowan and this Anders, or someone using her name. Poirot stood and drew a long breath. Our challenge is to determine who had a motive to hide this. Lady Thornwood may remember details of Elizabeth Anders, but the others, Miss Griffiths, mindful of her position, Edward, eager for inheritance, Colonel Harcourt, tied by honour, Dr Lancaster, bound by professional discretion, each could profit from silence. He moved to the window and gazed into the garden. Here, Hastings, is where the locket was discovered. A path of red roses leads from the terrace. Whoever placed it must have taken care not to be seen, yet they acted in daylight. By stealth, then, Hastings said. Perhaps during luncheon, when everyone was occupied. Precisely. Poirot turned, eyes alight with thought. Consider the luncheon sequence, Lady Thornwood at the head of the table, with Dr Lancaster to her right and Miss Griffiths to her left. Edward sat opposite Miss Griffiths, and Colonel Harcourt beside him. The tray bearing Penelope's morning tea was absent, but a discreet footman attended to general service. No one remarked seeing a tray elsewhere. He paused. Yet the locket and glove were found at almost the same spot, two distinct items, placed deliberately. The glove must belong to its owner, but what if it was planted to mislead? Hastings pondered. Which glove would fit our suspects? Colonel Harcourt's physique suggests he might wear a size too large. Miss Griffiths would wear a smaller size. Dr Lancaster wears gloves rarely, if at all. Let us test that. Poirot rang a small bell on the mantelpiece. Within moments, Mr Baldwin appeared at the door. Fetch 2 pairs of gloves from the dressing rooms, one in men's size 9, the other in ladies' size 6. And ask Miss Griffiths to produce both gloves, if she would be so good. Baldwin bowed and vanished. Poirot turned back to Hastings. Later, we shall see which glove matches. Well done, Poirot, Hastings murmured. But there is also the question of how the letter came to be only half burnt. An interesting point, Poirot agreed. Only someone familiar with the hearth could have retrieved the half-consumed letter after burning the rest. The fire would have collapsed the paper into ashes swiftly, yet these fragments remain intact. The burner must have intervened mid-process. That implies hesitation, a fear of discovery, or time constraints. Hastings nodded. But who would burn the letter? Miss Griffiths claimed she destroyed what remained in the wastepaper basket. Her actions are suspicious, Poirot said. Yet she insisted upon protection of her pupil. Perhaps genuine, yet perhaps also opportunistic. He moved to the table again, placing his fingertips upon the locket's hinge. This locket has been opened and closed many times, witness the wear, but the hinge contains a tiny speck of soil embedded in its crevice. Poirot withdrew a cane from behind the hearth and applied gentle pressure to dislodge the granule. He placed it upon a silver tray. Garden soil, possibly from a flower bed. The bearer of this locket must have walked barefoot or with the glove in hand through the rose garden, brushing the hinge against the earth. Or rubbed it on their glove, Hastings suggested. Exactly. Poirot steepled his fingers. A detail many would overlook. Now, Hastings, the sole question remains, who among our suspects had the opportunity to place these items in daylight and the motive to bring the letter's contents to light, or to bury them forever? He straightened. We shall reconvene for our formal examination of the glove fits and soil samples. I have instructed Dr. Lancaster to analyze the soil's composition. Meanwhile, I will interview each guest again, but in private. There, alone, one's mask often slips. As Baldwin returned with 2 pairs of gloves, one long, kid leather glove of men's size 9, and a delicate silk glove of ladies' size 6, Poirot instructed Hastings to remain. He donned the men's glove on his own right hand, slipped it easily into place, then removed it and offered it to Hastings to test for fit. Hastings's hand filled the glove fully, the wrist and fingers snug but not tight. Not Colonel Harcourt's, Poirot noted, his hands are larger. He next inspected the lady's glove, which he slipped onto Hastings's smaller hand, where it stretched uncomfortably. Nor ours, on Amy. Now to Miss Griffiths's hand. He sent Baldwin to summon the governess. When Miss Griffiths arrived, cheeks pale but determined, Poirot asked her to try on both gloves. The lady's silk glove embraced her hand perfectly, the men's glove fell an inch from her fingertips. Which is yours? Poirot inquired. She paused, eyes darting. The silk glove, of course. She bit her lip. But I do not see how this concerns the case. This very glove was found beneath the bookcase in the library, Poirot replied. Your glove? Miss Griffiths's hands trembled. I misplaced it days ago. I searched everywhere, but it did not turn up until now. Her voice wavered. Poirot raised a hand. We shall speak further in due course. For now, Hastings, we have determined that this glove belongs to Miss Griffiths. The locket, however, belonged once to Edward. The soil sample we extract from the hinge matches the rose bed, not any recent potted plant. The letter fragments, yet to be fully deciphered, speak of a dear friend and a warning not to let them know. He paused and looked deep into Hastings's eyes. We have before us the signs of a complex web of loyalty, fear, and betrayal. The governess's glove, the heir's locket, the physician's haste at the hearth, each thread points in a different direction. Yet only one strand will lead to the truth. Closing his notebook, Poirot turned to the door. Gentlemen, the time approaches for further revelations. Soon, you shall each hear more of what I have discovered. And in the quiet of this library, like the most delicate flower, the secret of Thornwood Manor will bloom forth under the light of reason. With that, Poirot strode from the library, leaving Hastings to ponder the gathering storm of clues. Outside, the roses whispered in the breeze, as though carrying tidings of what was yet to come. And within the ancient walls, the hidden locket awaited its final purpose, the unmasking of the culprit. Chapter 5, Poisoned Intentions. Dinner at Thornwood Manor proceeded under an uneasy calm. The long oak table, set with gleaming silver and crystal, had been laid in the flickering glow of candelabra, and the guests assembled with polite restraint. Lady Aurelia Thornwood presided at the head, her face drawn yet composed. Colonel Harcourt sat to her right, his military bearing as solid as the mahogany chair, Dr. Lancaster to her left, attentive and watchful, Miss Griffiths opposite, her posture prim and her eyes darting, Edward and Captain Hastings completing the circle, and Mr. Baldwin standing discreetly behind the chairs, ready to attend. As the maître d' served consommé, and the conversation meandered through inconsequential remarks on the weather and the estate's latest repairs, Poirot observed each guest with his customary intensity. He nibbled a single spoonful of soup, then set the porcelain bowl aside. Hastings, more hearty in appetite, consoled himself with second helpings, whereas Edward appeared distracted, poking at his plate of roast pheasant and barely touching the peas. "Everything all right, Edward?" Hastings murmured as the entree was cleared. Edward offered a wan smile. Just a touch weary, Hastings. I think the air of the manor has a soporific effect. Poirot's eyes flickered to Edward's wine glass. The red burgundy, introduced for the pheasant, glowed like garnet. Edward drained half before pausing, his hand trembling. He set the glass down with more force than intended, a crimson ring formed on the cloth. Moments later, as the dessert, lemon syllabub, was served, Edward's complexion took on a peculiar pallor. He coughed, stiffened in his chair, then clutched at his throat. His breath came in short, rasping gasps. Colonel Harcourt leapt to his feet, Dr. Lancaster sprang forward, his medical instincts alert, and Hastings caught Edward's elbow to steady him. Cyanosis, Dr. Lancaster declared, pressing a stethoscope to Edward's chest. He's in shock, dangerously so. Someone fetch water and ammonia spirits. Miss Griffiths, her face ashen, dashed to a sideboard and returned with a jug of iced water which Hastings held beneath Edward's lips. The butler rushed in with a small bottle of smelling salts. Dr. Lancaster applied a few drops beneath Edward's nose, the young man inhaled sharply, his colour returning slightly, and he sat upright, trembling. What happened? Edward rasped, eyes wild. I thought I would sleep. He looked at his wine glass, now empty save for a few receding droplets along its sides. Poirot rose deliberately, smoothing his waistcoat. He approached the table, inspecting Edward's glass and the decanter from which it had been poured. The decanter bore no label and was half full of wine. Poirot tapped it with a gloved fingertip. Prussic acid, he announced quietly, so that only Hastings and Lady Thornwood could hear. A taste may be sufficient to produce these symptoms. He paused and regarded the table. The poison must have been introduced shortly before Edward drank. Yet when was the decanter filled? Lady Thornwood's voice tremored as she replied, with the soup, we had white wine. For the pheasant, I approved a fresh decanter of red. Mr. Baldwin brought it from the wine cellar. Precisely, Poirot murmured. The cellar is locked after nightfall, and only one key exists, kept by you, dear lady. The butler retrieved it. Later, he returned the key to your boudoir. Baldwin lifted his head. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. His tone was respectful yet firm. Then our suspect must have had access to the decanter either before it was filled or after it was placed upon this table. Poirot swept his gaze over each guest. A person with both opportunity and motive to ensure Edward's incapacitation. Colonel Harcourt stepped forward, jaw set. You imply that Edward was the target? Not necessarily, Poirot replied. The intention may have been to poison someone else, perhaps Miss Rowan, who customarily shared Edward's table in the drawing room. Yet with her indisposed, the seat was vacant. Opportunely, the murderer may have grasped the chance to poison the air, thereby sowing greater confusion within the family. A murmur rippled around the table. Lady Thornwood laid a trembling hand upon Edward's arm. My nephew, she began, but the words died on her lips. Dr. Lancaster crouched beside Edward, examining him closely. He is stable for now, the doctor announced, but must rest immediately. I shall administer an antidote and keep him under observation. He motioned to Hastings. If you would be so kind as to escort Edward to my consulting room. Hastings nodded, supporting Edward to his feet. Edward swayed, but Hastings's strong arm held him upright. They exited the dining room, leaving a tense hush behind. Poirot remained, his mind working with rapid precision. He stood by the table as Baldwin cleared away the remains of dinner with meticulous care. The silver was polished, the cloth folded, and the glasses replaced, yet Poirot noted every minor displacement. The decanter's stopper lay on its side, the scent of bitter almonds, a telltale hint of cyanide, still lingered faintly in his nostrils, and the soup tureen remained untouched, though the poison had been added elsewhere. When the room was cleared, Lady Thornwood offered Poirot a trembling cup of tea in the drawing room. He accepted it but did not drink. Instead, he sat by the fire, hands folded, eyes closed in concentration. Presently Hastings returned alone. He hovered at the edge of the Persian rug. He's resting now, Poirot. Dr. Lancaster says the worst is over, thanks to the smelling salts and his quick intervention. Poirot opened his eyes. But Hastings, your own quick thinking did much. We must credit you with saving his life. Hastings inclined his head, but his expression was grave. Poirot, who would do such a thing? And why? On Amy, therein lies the conundrum. Poirot rose. Let us review what we know. He led Hastings back to the dining room, now vacant but still heavy with the residue of menace. The poison was introduced into this decanter of Burgundy. That decanter was accessed only by authorized personnel, Lady Thornwood, as mistress, Mr. Baldwin, as custodian of keys, and anyone who could access Lady Thornwood's private boudoir. Colonel Harcourt and Miss Griffiths both had keys, I think, Hastings interjected. They retired to their suites on the second floor, each with a duplicate key. Poirot nodded. Then four had opportunity, Lady Thornwood, Mr. Baldwin, Colonel Harcourt, and Miss Griffiths. Dr. Lancaster had no reason to possess a key, though he could have bribed the butler. Edward himself never entered the cellar. He paused. We must consider motive. To whom would Edward's elimination be advantageous? Hastings rubbed his chin. Edward stood to inherit the estate. If he were removed, the inheritance would revert to the next heir. Who would that be? Lady Thornwood, arriving quietly, stood beside Hastings. After Edward, the next in line is my niece, Penelope, should she recover. Failing her, it reverts to me. But if both were lost, her voice faltered. Poirot gestured for calm. Yes, the stakes are high. But consider also emotional motives, jealousy, resentment, fear. Would Miss Griffiths fear Edward's influence upon Penelope? Would Colonel Harcourt, whose admiration for Penelope bordered on affection, wish Edward absent? Or Dr. Lancaster, protective of his patient, aiming to safeguard Penelope's welfare by removing her cousin? He met Lady Thornwood's gaze. And you, dear lady, though naturally distressed, would you benefit? Your title and estate secure in the event of both heirs' demise. Lady Thornwood's eyes filled. Monsieur Poirot, I would never, her voice cracked. You must believe me. Believe? Poirot said softly. I consider, I examine, I deduce. Emotions are pointers, not proof. He opened his notebook. I shall visit the wine cellar tonight. Perhaps the physical evidence there will yield further clarity. Lady Thornwood clasped her hands. Be careful. She turned to Hastings. Will you accompany him? Hastings hesitated, then nodded. Of course. After a tense interval, Poirot and Hastings made their way to the cellar, escorted by Baldwin's cautious lantern light. The stone steps descended into cool darkness, where rows of oaken racks held casks and bottles. Poirot examined the decanter's original shelf, noting a fine residue upon the groove where the stopper sat, a trace that, if tested, might reveal more than simple wine sediment. Notice, Hastings, Poirot whispered, pressing his fingertips to the rim. A reddish stain here, an old spill, long since wiped away, yet the groove remained stained. He illuminated the groove with the lantern. This residue oxidizes differently than pure wine. Someone wiped the decanter clean before filling it, an act betraying foreshadowing and haste. Hastings frowned. Only someone conscientious, and guilty, would think to remove every trace. Or someone familiar with forensic minutiae, Poirot murmured. Our murderer is no amateur. They ascended in silence, the weight of discovery settling like dust upon their shoulders. Upstairs, the manor lay shrouded in lamplight and shadow, the household slept uneasy, each room a vault of suspicion. Back in the drawing room, Poirot seated himself and beckoned Lady Thornwood. We must keep our inquiries quiet, he said. To prevent panic and preserve evidence. Tomorrow, I shall confront each suspect with these findings. For tonight, Hastings, you will remain near Penelope's room, I shall watch the corridor outside. He smiled thinly. The little grey cells must rest, but not entirely. A watchful mind sees even in dreams. Hastings nodded. As you wish, Poirot. And so, under the quiet watch of the manor's night, the threads of deceit tightened. Somewhere among them lurked the heart of malice, poisoned intentions, as he would later term it, waiting for the little grey cells to unravel the final strand. Chapter 6, The Gathering of Suspects. Late the following morning, the great hall of Thornwood Manor felt cavernous beneath its vaulted ceiling. Pale daylight filtered through stained glass panels, casting muted patterns across the polished floor. At Monsieur Poirot's summons, Lady Aurelia Thornwood assembled the household in this central chamber: Colonel Harcourt, tall and rigid in his uniform; Dr. Walter Lancaster, his countenance grave; Miss Florence Griffiths, hands clasped before her; Edward Thornwood, still pale from his ordeal; Mr. Baldwin, stoic as ever; and Captain Hastings, by Poirot's side. A hush fell as Poirot emerged from the adjoining drawing-room, his manner composed yet commanding. He wore a spotless morning suit, the silver ends of his moustaches curled in deliberate symmetry. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice warm but firm, "you have already displayed admirable patience and cooperation. Yet the events of the past 24 hours, an assault, an attempted murder by poison, and the discovery of concealed evidence, demand that we pause together to review what we know, and to uncover where uncertainty remains. Pray be seated." They sank into high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle before him. Poirot placed on a small table the silver tray containing the white silk glove, the open locket, and the fragments of paper. Hastings bore a narrow dish with a sample of garden soil. Poirot motioned to each item in turn. "First," he said, lifting the glove, "we establish its ownership. This glove belongs, as I demonstrated, to Miss Griffiths." She held its gaze, lips pressed tight. Yet it appeared beneath the librarian's bookcase, the very spot where Miss Rowan fell. "Why was your glove there, Miss Griffiths?" She swallowed. "I misplaced it days ago," she replied, voice trembling. "I searched frantically but found nothing. Then I discovered it here this morning, and I confess I was puzzled." "Puzzled indeed," Poirot murmured. He set down the glove and lifted the locket. This locket belonged originally to Edward Thornwood, engraved E.A., though the portrait within is that of Miss Rowan. "Edward, you confessed that this heirloom was lost long ago." Edward nodded, the inevitable guilt in his downcast eyes. "And yet it was found yesterday in the rose garden. Who placed it there, I wonder?" Edward's jaw tightened. "I cannot say. I did not put it there." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed. A curious circumstance." Now, he turned to Lady Thornwood, "These charred fragments, letters bearing mention of a dear friend and warnings not to let them know, were rescued from your hearth. Dr. Lancaster, you admitted to burning correspondence you deemed private, but the operation was only half complete." "Why?" The doctor's calm façade cracked. He clasped his hands. "Those letters were from Penelope about events years ago, hurtful memories best left forgotten. I wished to spare her pain, madam. I had no wish to harm her." Poirot's eyes bore into the doctor's. "Protectiveness, perhaps. Yet might that same protectiveness extend to removing those who threatened her?" Dr. Lancaster's breathing quickened. "I would never. I mean, she is like a daughter to me." Poirot turned, addressing the room at large. "We see then three threads: the glove of Miss Griffiths, the locket of Edward, the charred letter of Dr. Lancaster. Yet there are more: the footprint in the library, size 9, horseshoe pattern, matching Colonel Harcourt's boots, the residue in the wine decanter, traces of thorough cleaning, and the glass of prussic acid, so deftly introduced to Edward's drink." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "One by one, I shall call upon each of you to account for these details." He pointed to the Colonel. "Colonel Harcourt, your boots bear the very pattern found in the carpet. You claim to have walked in the rose garden by moonlight, though no one saw you there. Why?" Colonel Harcourt stood, voice measured. "I confess, Monsieur Poirot, I admired the roses under the stars. I would never harm Penelope or Edward. My only concern is for Lady Thornwood's safety." Poirot nodded. "Chivalrous, yet would chivalry alone lead you to tamper with a decanter of wine? You had both means and opportunity. Your military precision suggests you knew how to handle subtlety." Harcourt's face darkened. "I did not poison Edward. Perhaps not Edward, Poirot conceded. But the intention may have been to incapacitate someone else, in order to render the gallery of truths invisible. He turned to Miss Griffiths. Miss Griffiths, you pour for your pupil daily. You understood exactly how to serve Miss Rowan her afternoon tea. That tray which went missing was yours to manage. Yet it vanished when the poison needed to be delivered elsewhere. What do you say? She wept quietly. I looked after Penelope as best I could. I would never harm her. Poirot's gentle tone wavered only slightly. And yet, Miss Griffiths, you burned her letters indicating a secret past. You had motive to silence her, did you not? Miss Griffiths's shoulders shook. Those letters, they spoke of pain. I wished only to protect her from the shame of it. Poirot sighed. He placed a hand on the locket. And Edward, you share the locket with your cousin. You had reason to confront her over a wager, perhaps something more serious. Financial motives weigh heavy upon you. Edward's eyes blazed. I had debts, yes. But would I poison my own kin? He broke off as Poirot held up the soil sample. This soil, Hastings tells me, matches only the rose beds, not the wider gardens. Whoever handled this locket walked deliberately through that avenue of blossoms, trusting none to see. Yet the gloves you wore, Miss Griffiths, would have left no prints. Convenient, none? Miss Griffiths bowed her head. I walked there alone when I saw Penelope's tray had gone missing. I thought to check in the library. I found the locket on the path, and my glove caught upon it. I picked it up, intending to return it to her, but you burned the letters first, Poirot finished. In your mind, protecting her. But then curiosity or fear held you back. All eyes turned to Dr. Lancaster. Poirot stepped close to the physician. And you, doctor, protector of health, born of medical knowledge. You knew how to administer a sedative, how to handle powders. The poison, though acidulous in its bite, would have been familiar to you. Dr. Lancaster drew himself up. No. I saved Penelope from the sedative overdose, and I saved Edward from the poison. Poirot allowed a moment of silence before addressing Lady Thornwood. And you, madam, keeper of keys and master of the house. You control access to the cellar and the boudoir wherein the decanter key resides. Why did you send Hastings to guard Penelope's room rather than the corridor by the wine cellar? A diversion, perhaps. Lady Thornwood's lips trembled. I feared another attempt. Poirot regarded each in turn, voice lowering. We stand at an impasse of motives. Yet only one of you could manipulate the tray's disappearance, fire's interruption, Earth's transfer, and poison's placement, all without betraying yourself until now. I shall retire to consider your testimonies further. Meanwhile, I ask that none leave the hall. With that, he swept from the chamber, leaving the suspects to exchange anxious glances. Hastings rose immediately. What now, Poirot? Poirot paused at the doorway, glancing back. Now, my friend, the little grey cells will sift through each word, each omission, each glance exchanged. Tomorrow, I shall call upon you again, armed with further proof. But tonight, I dine alone with my thoughts. Hastings lowered himself into a chair, steepling his own fingers. There are too many threads for a single mind. Poirot smiled faintly. Then I shall remove all but one, Hastings, the one thread that binds the crime to its architect. Patience, mon ami, patience. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the ancient doors of Thornwood Manor as if to whisper that the hour of reckoning approached. Within its walls, truth lay hidden, but not for long. Chapter 7, The Manifold Deceptions. The hours before midnight at Thornwood Manor carried a peculiar hush, as though the house itself held its breath in expectation. Lamps burned low in the corridor outside the library, their flickering glow casting long shadows on the oak paneling. Inside, Poirot sat at the great desk, his little grey cells busily at work, while Hastings reclined on a settee, going over his notes by the light of the fire. It has been a most curious day, Hastings sighed, pouring himself a glass of sherry that he had asked Baldwin to furnish. Every hypothesis we advance branches into a dozen possibilities. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. C'est la nature of human deceit, Hastings. Each person conceals truth beneath layers of motive and misdirection. But remember, it is the smallest inconsistency that heralds guilt. A sudden movement at the door drew their attention. Mr. Baldwin stood in the archway, face solemn. Monsieur Poirot, I regret to report that the silver tray bearing the locket and glove has disappeared from this room. Poirot rose abruptly, heart quickening. Disappeared. He crossed to the table, where only an empty spot remained. And no trace of forced entry. Baldwin shook his head. None. The door was secure as always. He inclined his head respectfully and withdrew. Mon Dieu, Hastings exclaimed. Someone intends to frustrate your deductions. Poirot smoothed his waistcoat and replaced his pince-nez. Indeed. Let us proceed with caution. He strode to the door and beckoned Hastings. You will station yourself outside, Hastings, to prevent further tampering. I shall search the house. Hastings rose and took position by the corridor, lantern in hand. Poirot slipped from the library into the dim passage, moving from room to room with silent purpose. In Lady Thornwood's boudoir, he found the key to the wine cellar lying upon the dressing table, undisturbed. In Colonel Harcourt's study, a single sheet of paper lay upon the writing desk, a torn scrap from one of the charred letters, indicating someone risked collecting evidence even here. Poirot pocketed the scrap and continued to Miss Griffiths's suite. The door was ajar. Within, her reticule lay open upon a chair, its contents scattered, handkerchiefs, a novel, and a small vial of scented oil. He rifled silently through the pockets and discovered nothing but a folded note, "Meet me in the rose garden at dawn." Poirot tucked the note into his coat. The butler's pantry yielded no prize, though the bottles were arranged meticulously on their shelves. The more Poirot searched, the more convinced he became that the thief had intimate knowledge of the manor's layout. Only someone with free movement after dark could spirit away the evidence so cleanly. Returning to the corridor outside the library, Poirot found Hastings leaning wearily against the wall. No sign of the tray. Poirot asked. Hastings shook his head. Nothing. I heard a faint sound of something dropped, perhaps in the corridor beyond the grand staircase, but by the time I ventured there, nothing remained. Poirot stood for a moment, listening. The manor was silent save for the distant drip of water in the kitchens and the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock. Then he noticed a subtle shift in the lantern's beam. On the polished floor by the library door lay a fragment of silk, no larger than a thumbnail. He crouched and picked it up, deep crimson, with a single golden thread woven through. Poirot's brow furrowed. A piece of fabric from the murderer's garment, he murmured. The glove owner? Or someone else? Hastings leaned over. It does not match Miss Griffiths's gloves. Those were ivory silk, embroidered with lavender. This is coarser, and stained. Stained indeed, Poirot agreed. Likely with wine or blood. He placed the fragment in an envelope. We shall test it at first light. Poirot rose, smoothing his moustache. Come, Hastings. Let us return to the library. The thief may have hidden the tray within these walls. Inside, the room was exactly as they had left it, the desk cleared, the fireplace cold, and no sign of forced disturbance. Poirot examined the mantelpiece, his eyes narrowing on an inscription carved into the wood, AT 1904. He tapped the carved initials and traced them with his fingertip. AT. A tribute to the late Lord Thornwood, perhaps. Yet why carve it upon the mantel? To remind someone of past promise, or guilt? Hastings smiled wryly. Guilt has a peculiar way of marking its bearer. Poirot's gaze shifted to the high bookcases. He raised his cane and lightly tapped the third shelf. A hollow echo responded. Hastings, pull that volume of Shakespeare. Hastings obeyed, withdrawing a weighty edition of Hamlet. The shelf swung forward, revealing a shallow niche behind the books. Inside lay the silver tray, still bearing the glove and locket, now dusted with a thin layer of ash. Poirot gently retrieved them and set them upon the desk. As I suspected, our perpetrator hid the evidence close at hand, returning later under cover of dark to retrieve it, yet forgot this secret compartment. Brilliant, Hastings murmured. But who knew of this hiding place? The butler, Mr. Baldwin, showed me this niche when I first arrived, Poirot said. He pointed out the shelf during our initial tour, remarking on the family heirloom concealment. Hastings whistled softly. He's the only person who could have hidden them here, and who knew the secret of the shelf. Poirot nodded. But let us not leap to conclusions. The locket and glove, once ours again, restore the state of evidence. Tomorrow, I shall call each suspect to inspection of their garments and hands for traces of soil, wax, or blood. Tonight, I will examine the silk fragment and the scrap of charred letter. He placed both items into his coat pocket. And Hastings, you will remain vigilant outside my door. Hastings saluted. At your service, Poirot. As dawn approached, Poirot reclined in a high-backed chair, reviewing the day's bewildering deceptions. The butler's intimate knowledge of the manor, the governess's clandestine note, the colonel's midnight garden stroll, Edward's vanished heirloom, and Dr. Lancaster's interrupted burn, all wove together in a complex tapestry. Yet one unifying pattern eluded him. At last, Poirot closed his eyes in forced rest, aware that the final threads of the mystery would unravel only when the suspects believed themselves safe. Outside, the manor's ancient timbers sighed as the first breeze of morning stirred the roses. Within, hidden truths waited to bloom beneath the scrutiny of Hercule Poirot's unerring mind. Chapter 8, Poirot's Masterstroke. The morning sun glinted on the dew-drenched rosebeds as the household assembled in the drawing-room, summoned by Hercule Poirot for his final revelation. Edward, lean and pale, sat beside Lady Thornwood, Colonel Harcourt stood rigid by the mantelpiece, Miss Griffiths balanced at the far side, Dr. Lancaster, face drawn, took a hesitant seat, and Mr. Baldwin remained silent beside the door. Hastings stood at Poirot's shoulder, ready to witness the denouement. Poirot rose, immaculate in grey morning suit, and surveyed the group with kindly severity. Mesdames et messieurs, the long night of uncertainty ends today. My little grey cells have completed their task, and the truth lies before us, in motive, means, and opportunity. He strode to the mantelpiece and tapped the charred letter fragments neatly displayed on a silver salver. These fragments bore words of warning, do not let them know. They were torn from a longer correspondence addressed to Penelope Rowan, in which she disclosed awareness of a concealed lineage, her paternity unknown to all but one confidant. He looked at Dr. Lancaster. You, Doctor, were that confidant. Dr. Lancaster's jaw tightened. He stiffened, gripping the arm of his chair as if bracing for impact. Poirot lifted the white silk glove. This glove belonged to Miss Griffiths, yet it was found beneath the library bookcase. Miss Griffiths, you misplaced it days ago, but it returned here only after someone removed these letters from the hearth. You believed you were protecting your pupil when you burnt them. Miss Griffiths nodded, eyes downcast. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I feared she would be broken by the truth. Yet, Poirot continued, the letters could not harm her as the blows and poisons did. The glove was planted to mislead, to implicate the devoted governess. He laid the glove aside and crossed to the table bearing the silver locket. This locket, engraved, E.A., was forced upon Edward to suggest his involvement. In truth, it was removed from your desk, Edward, then placed in the rose garden to implicate you in a staged rendezvous. Edward's fist clenched at his side. I swear, I never went near the library that night. Indeed, Poirot said gently. Your nights in the billiard room were witnessed by Colonel Harcourt. But let us consider the footprint, size 9, horseshoe pattern, muddied with soil drawn from the rose bed. Colonel, you confessed to a midnight stroll among the flowers. Colonel Harcourt drew himself up. I walked there, to clear my mind. I saw nothing unusual. Yet, Poirot said, you trod through fresh earth, matching the locket's hinge soiled in exactly that bed. He indicated a simple diagram of the footprint's groove. But your boots carried no blood, no traces of prussic residue, only garden soil. Thus, though present, you did not poison Edward. A murmur passed through the assembly. Poirot turned to Lady Thornwood. My lady, You control the key to the wine cellar and the capacity to release poison into the decanter, but you lacked motive. The estate was secure in your hands. Lady Thornwood's expression trembled. I merely sought safety for my family. Precisely, nodded Poirot. Now, Hastings, if you please. Hastings produced a small vial containing the silk fragment collected by the library door. Poirot sprinkled a few grains of ash from the hearth onto the fragment. Observe how the ash adheres unevenly to fabric of coarse texture, an indication that the fragment was dislodged not from silk gloves but from the doctor's own frock coat. Dr. Lancaster's face went pale. Poirot continued without pause, you wore that coat when you visited Miss Rowan's room with sedative. You knew her vulnerability, and you knew how to manipulate chemicals. The poison in Edward's wine, prussic acid, was obtained from the medical cabinet you alone could access. Dr. Lancaster's voice trembled. No? I would never harm Edward. But you nearly did, Poirot said. Your true intent was to protect Penelope at any cost. When she discovered the truth of her birth, that her father was not the late Lord Thornwood but a man you once attended, you feared the scandal would destroy family reputation. He met the doctor's eyes steadily. You planned to abduct her for her own good, drugging her with a sedative potent enough to render her unconscious, then assaulting her in the library to render her mute. When that nearly killed her, you panicked, staged a more believable crime, and attempted to divert suspicion onto others. Dr. Lancaster lowered his head. I loved her as my own daughter. Yet love untempered by reason becomes folly, Poirot replied gently. Your gift of sedative was too strong, her collapse almost killed her. Realizing your failure, you burned her letters to conceal her knowledge, planted the locket to frame Edward, used the glove to frame Miss Griffiths, and lurked to hide evidence in Mr. Baldwin's secret niche, knowledge you gleaned from our tour. Finally, you attempted to poison Edward, believing that with him incapacitated, you could control events. Silence enveloped the room. Dr. Lancaster came to his feet, shoulders slumped. I confess all. He sank into a chair as though the weight of confession pinned him there. Penelope's pain was my burden, and I saw no end but drastic measures. Forgive me. Lady Thornwood rushed to his side. You monster! You nearly killed my niece. Tears glistened on her cheeks. Poirot raised his hand. Violence is never compassion. Dr. Lancaster, you will accompany me to the vicarage to await the authorities. I trust Penelope recovers swiftly. Turning to the others, Poirot offered a small bow. Thank you all for your patience and cooperation. We have at last unraveled the manifold deceptions that threaten Thornwood Manor. May this lesson in the perils of secrecy and unintended consequences guide you well. As the constable arrived to take Dr. Lancaster away, Hastings placed a reassuring hand on Poirot's shoulder. Mon ami, once again the little grey cells have triumphed. Poirot smiled, adjusting his cravat. The mind, dear Hastings, is the supreme instrument. Criminals underestimate the power of observation, logic, and the truth latent in the smallest detail. And now, let us hope that Thornwood returns to tranquility with its secrets laid to rest. Outside, the garden roses glistened with morning dew, and a fresh breeze stirred their petals, silent witnesses to Poirot's final victory. And within the manor's walls, peace settled again, as if in gratitude to the detective whose brilliance had restored order from the shadows of deceit.